Hi guys, it's Kelly Lativola here, and I'm back with another video for Simon Says Stamp. Today, I just really wanted something with some color. It has been like the frozen tundra here lately, so I'm using this Floral Bliss stamp set. I wanted something basically that was just going to kind of let me play with color, that wasn't going to take up a lot of time stamping, but was still going to give me a full card. So I love this kind of floral spray that's in the set, and I'm going to stamp it 2 times to fill my entire card. So I am working on Canson watercolor paper, and I am going to stamp this down 1 time. I'm using Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink because I know I wanted to do some Copic coloring, and it is waterproof. So I just pulled a very tiny little piece of masking paper off, put that on because I only need to mask just the center section of the flowers. If you were doing a banner that was slightly bigger, you wouldn't even need to do this. A slightly bigger banner would cover up that whole middle section, but because mine is smaller, I wanted to mask it just so I wouldn't have any stamping over top of one another. So I just trimmed out that little section, put that down, and then I'm stamping it a second time. With larger stamps, I like to kind of stamp up. I call it the Sherry Carroll CPR method, to just make sure that I get really good pressure on it. I'm going to go ahead and tape this down to a board now because I want to minimize the amount of warping that I have. So I'm just using some artist tape to just tape down each one of the sides. I cut the paper slightly larger than my card front. I think this is 6 by 4 3/4, so it gives me about 1/4 of an inch on each side that I can use to put the tape down. And then I'm going to do my background with Distress Oxides. So I picked just kind of like a rainbow of colors. I'm going to squish them down in my Ranger craft sheet and then pick them up with my paintbrush. And today I am using the number 8 round brush from the Silver Brush Company. I don't have a pattern in mind. I'm just kind of picking up the color, and I'm using the wet on dry technique. So my paintbrush is wet, but my paper is dry. And that's because the paper that I'm using is the Canson, I think it's the XL, which I had one of my own YouTube subscribers ask me about. This is the paper that she has. The one that I typically like to use is the Canson Monteval Aquarelle. It's a little bit thicker. This one is a little bit thinner. It is more of like a student grade. That doesn't mean that it won't work for you. The problem that she was having, that she was asking about, was the warping. So this was also something that I wanted to try to see if I could minimize the warping. So I'm adding not as much water. So I guess if you add a ton of water to your background, that's going to increase your chances for warping. So I'm not adding any really water to my edges. I'm just adding the amount of moisture that I need to put the pigment down. I am going back in a couple of times to just boost up that intensity of color. And then I'm kind of just being aware of the colors that are next to each other. None of the colors that I picked are really kind of like no-nos to have next to each other, except maybe the yellow and the purple. That might be something that will give you a little bit of mud if you really kind of work them and mix them together. I didn't. I just kind of put them next to each other, and I didn't really have any issues. So now that I'm happy with the intensity of the color, I'm going to go back and kind of play around with the edges a little bit. I don't like what I call like manufactured edges. I like things that look a little bit more organic. So I have a tendency to, once I go back in, to kind of pull the edges out a little bit, add a couple of little droplets. I also will like to maybe do spatters on the edges. That gives it just kind of like a more organic edge. The other thing that I did to kind of just make it a little bit more interesting was I like took some of the blue and put it in the purple just to kind of mix it up. Now you can see on the left-hand side, it is getting a little bit muddy where the purple and the pink are running into the yellow. I just blotted that up with just the side of a paper towel just to pull up that color. But ultimately, I was really happy with it. I liked just kind of the rainbow of colors. I did speckle on some just clean, clear water. It didn't lift as much as I had hoped that it would. So I did that a couple of times, and now I'm going to dry it with my heat tool on the board. This is another thing that's going to help kind of minimize that warping as I'm drying it while it's still flat. And then just, went through, waited for that to be dry. And I did get some warping because it is a little bit of thinner paper, but that doesn't make it bad paper. It just depends on the look that you're going for. So if you're doing a wet on wet background where you're adding a ton of water, I would not recommend using this paper. But for anything else, where you're going to be using minimal amounts of water or where you're going to be avoiding the edges, this will work just fine. So either one of them would be totally okay. Now, if you watch my videos, you know I love Copic markers. I love one layer cards. And so I just kind of wanted to have those florals kind of pop off the page a little bit more. So I'm going in with basically 2 color blends, just 2 colors that match the colors that are already down. So for the fossilized amber, I picked a Y08 and a YR24. And I'm just going in, and where I would have added the shading if I was coloring them without the background, that's where I'm adding the color, anywhere that yellow is. And when we do the YR24, you're probably going to be a little bit like, Kelly, that's brown. Why are you putting brown in this background? It's going to look really, really brown because it's the only color that we have down, but just kind of hang with me because by the end of it, you won't even notice that it's brown. It will look more gold. So for the little berries, I'm adding shading from the bottom. I'm leaving just the watercolor color, as the highlight color. On the edges for the flowers, I am just adding kind of little like C shapes to the shape, the shapes of the petals that are already drawn there. For the leaves, I'm adding them from the center out toward the edges. That's going to be, the center is going to be where my darkest shading is. And then I'm going to go back in and blend out with my lightest color. So you can see already from the yellow, it's kind of starting to pop forward. And then we're just going to work our way through all of these colors here. Everything is pretty much going to be the same exact way. I'm adding the shading to the center of the leaves out, and then pretty much from the center of the flowers or the berries at the base of the berries, adding shading from that section out, leaving the lightest edge on the very outside. So one of the reasons why I wanted so much color, like I said, it has been frigid here. We had probably a solid, 2 weeks of well below freezing temperatures, like single digit temperatures. And so I was just kind of longing for spring. I'm sure, I mean, it wasn't just here in Ohio. It was, I know my friend Dawn in Florida was like a solid 20 degrees in Florida, which is crazy. But then this kind of strange thing happened with the weather pattern, and we ended up getting a southern wind. And so as I sit here today, it is 55 degrees outside in January in Ohio, which is just as bizarre as that 1 degree temperature I was having last week. So I don't really know what's going on with Mother Nature. It's a little bit crazy. My spring in the middle of January isn't going to last, though, unfortunately, because it's going to be freezing rain tomorrow and then more snow. So I did put down the greens, and then I went back and just kind of blended out that yellow. There are sometimes when you're blending color families that you need to kind of go back and forth between the two to get a good blend. That's totally normal. Sometimes you just need to add more ink or more moisture to the paper to get them to blend better. That's how Copics blend. Copics blend like in the fibers of your paper. So the more moisture that you have on there, the better or easier it's going to be to blend them. For these little flowers, they almost look like kind of like baby's breath. I'm really just adding the darkest shading around the center and then kind of filling in the rest of the flower with the lightest color. For the bigger flowers, you'll see that sometimes I'm adding some blue to the flowers that are purple or pink, and that is where when I was doing the painting, where I had dropped in the blue a little bit just to make it more interesting. So for those flowers, you're going to see that I'm only doing kind of partial shading. Eventually the whole thing will get shaded as I bring in the other colors. You don't need to make this nearly as complicated as I did. You don't have to use nearly as many colors. You could do, if you just wanted to try it out and see if this was going to be something that you liked your results with, you could do just 1 or 2 colors, and then add the shading on top to kind of make it pop. There's another little trick that we're going to do at the end to make it pop even more. But so, yeah, it's just been really, really cold here. I've been wearing like 2 pairs of socks and 6 shirts pretty much everywhere that I go, and it's apparently just going to be that way for a while now. Pretty much after Christmas, I'm like done with the snow. I know that sounds terrible because I live in Ohio, but basically I live here because my family lives here, and I cannot survive without my mother's help in my life. And obviously I love my family, but so I can't leave. I can't go anywhere else. I'm me in Ohio forever. But also, I'm not really a very good traveler anyway. Like, even if I wanted to go somewhere else, I'm just, I don't like driving on the highway. It makes me very, very anxious. Flying never used to bother me, but then the last time I went to fly, I was also very anxious about that. So, and I've always gotten motion sickness. I don't know if anybody can sympathize with me there, but I have always, my whole life, gotten motion sickness. So Dramamine's like my best friend, but then I'm like half unconscious, which really doesn't make for a great road trip partner, let me tell you. And then when I don't take it, so my husband and I, when we got married, we, where did we go? We went to St. Lucia on our honeymoon. And it was so long. So we're flying, the game plan was to fly from Cleveland to Boston, Boston to Puerto Rico, Puerto Rico to St. Lucia. So very, very long day. I think we were flying for like 13 hours, and we had a bunch of layovers. So what were we doing? We were packing and opening gifts and all this stuff. And so the night before, we end up staying up all night. This is a terrible plan. Don't do this. Don't. It was awful. So we ended up staying up all night because we have to be at the airport for our flight at like 5 a.m. So we get to the airport and they have canceled our flight to Boston. We got nothing. We got no flight to Boston. And we're like, great, how are we going to... Or, I'm sorry, we were supposed to go to Chicago. That's my bad. They canceled our flight to Chicago. And then, so they got us on a flight to Boston. Now, this is going to sound so pretentious. I don't mean for it to be, but... I have never flown on a plane that did not have 3 seats on each side. So whatever that is, like this giant 747. I've never flown on a smaller plane. And so they give us this flight to Boston, and there's probably like 10 people on the flight. They tell us, well, there's like 2 seats on one side and 1 seat on the other, so it's clearly a smaller plane. And then they tell us they need to redistribute our seating for the weight of the plane. So right out the gate, I'm like, this is terrifying. But nonetheless, we move toward the back of the plane. It was maybe, I don't know, a 45-minute flight. And that was pretty much all it took for me to get sick. So, because I didn't take the Dramamine, because it was only the first leg of the trip. And I wanted to be conscious when I switched planes in Chicago. I want Craig have to, carry my lethargic body off of the airplane. So we're sitting there, I get sick. I am quietly throwing up into a airplane bag in the corner. It was just not a good start. My husband, we've been married for like 24 hours at this point. He was a total trooper. He went to the bathroom and took care of the bag for me. He was very, very sweet. We make it to Boston. When we get off the plane at Boston, my shoe breaks. I'm wearing just like a pair of Nike running shoes because traveling all day, I wanted to be comfortable. And like the sole of my shoe is literally flopping off. Like it's floppy. Gosh. So I'm like, are you kidding me? So like our flight is canceled. I've been sick. My shoe is floppy. Like as I'm walking through the airport, it's just like slapping around. So I buy some, just like the only thing they had was like the, why can't I think of it's the glue, the instant drying glue. Why is that word eluding me? I don't even know. I'm sure you're all going to tell me in the comments below though. And then I'm going to be like, yeah, of course that's it. But anyway, so I glue my shoe together at Boston airport. We hang out there. I take the Dramamine, get something to eat, board the next flight to Puerto Rico. And before the plane even takes off, I am unconscious because now I've taken the Dramamine. I've been up for like something like 21 hours. I don't even know what Craig did on that flight because he can't sleep on planes. So he must have been bored to tears, but I was in La La Land, just dreaming. So we get to Puerto Rico, no issues. When we get there, we have like 5 hours we have to kill in the Puerto Rico airport. So we get something to eat. I think we just had like a hamburger and fries. And our bill was like $60. We were like, whoa, never eaten here again. We managed to survive that with like some card games and just conversation. I read a book. He tried to take a nap. Then it's now, I think we boarded our flight to St. Lucia. It was like 9:30 at night or something. We get on the plane. It's another small plane, which is very scary. There's no air conditioning. We are now obviously heading into the Caribbean. It's very warm on the plane. Everybody's just kind of sweaty. I fall asleep on the plane again because thankfully, like I said, it was very warm. I was tired. So traveling with me sleeping, A-okay. Traveling with me awake means I'm going to throw up in a bag. So we get to the airport. They pick us up. We did one of those like resorts. They pick us up, drive us through like these winding backwoods to the resort. Pause. We're going to talk about the card. So in order to make these pop off the page a little bit more, I'm going to add a shadow behind them. I'm going to use a C5 to add the shadow behind the items that are on the background. And then once that is done, I'm going to go back in with a C3, blend out that C5 shadow, but then also add a shadow to the flowers that are in the bouquet. So I'm going to put those shadows right over the other stamped objects. So if there's a flower on top of a leaf, I'm going to put the shadow right on top, right next to the flower on top of that leaf. So we get to the resort. It's about 11 o'clock at night. And I know they're trying to be fancy. We both know it. Like they greet us with like champagne and it was super nice. But really at this point, like we're both just tired and we want to go to bed. Like that's all we want to do is just be done with this day, this horrific day. So finally they load us up on these golf carts. And they are dropping off all these people. I think there was like 6 of us on the golf cart, and of course we're the last people to be dropped off because Murphy's Law. They drop us off. The room is beautiful, but it has like these little teeny tiny bugs, which I guess is their equivalent of ants. So they get us a new room, and then before they get us the new room, they spray for that. They were really very accommodating. Finally, like, get in, want to brush my teeth, put in my jams, like, take a shower. It's just been a long day. And I open my suitcase, and I use, well, some of you, if you're younger, you might not even know what I'm talking about. But if you're my age or older, you will. I use hot rollers in my hair. And basically, they heat up in, like, a plastic case. There's a plastic lid that sits on top of it. I open up my suitcase, and the hot roller lid has shattered. Just completely busted. I'm adding accents with a white gel pen. So it's completely broken apart. The lotion that I had in there, even though I had it double wrapped in a bag, has exploded over all of my clothes, just everywhere. And I just start crying. Like, that was like the straw that broke the camel's back. Like, I don't have any clothes to wear. My things are broken. It was just not, I was just so exhausted with the whole thing. I'm also going to go back in and outline with the AEK Success Journaling pen, because I just feel like it makes the colors pop so much more, especially when you're using watercolor paper and maybe it's harder to get a really bold line. So I have to have all of my stuff laundered, which is going to cost me a fortune, because I don't have a washing machine. Like, it is what it is. So I call down there, they come take all of our stuff. They tell me that it'll take like 2 days. I call my mom, just to let her know that we got there okay, the whole thing. And she tells me, like, that I had she's like, well, you had a couple of extra tops. I vacuum sealed them and put them in the top of your suitcase. So thankfully, my mother, thank you, Lord, I actually had clothes to wear because my mom vacuum sealed them and put them on the top of my suitcase. Like, and this is why I need my mom. This is why I can't leave Ohio, people. So, and then they ended up taking so long with my laundry that they ended up putting they comped it for me, because it was supposed to be done in 2 days and it actually ended up taking 3. So, and then the glue from my shoe, when my shoe broke, I used the glue to glue my hot rollers back together. So, everything kind of happened and it worked out just fine. But, this is why I don't travel, because these things like this happen, though they are funny stories. I will give it that. My husband was a trooper through the whole thing, even when I started crying like a big baby. So for the sentiment, I wanted it to be lengthwise. You saw I just kind of wiped it off there. I heat set that with white Simon Says Stamp embossing powder. If you get embossing powder where you don't want it, I kind of did. I just scraped it away with my craft knife. And then if there were any areas that were really problematic, I used my black Copic marker to just kind of cover them up. It just blends seamlessly into the paper. You probably won't even notice that anything needed to be fixed there, but I will tell you that coloring over embossing powder, I have heard that it can ruin your Copic nibs, so do that at your own risk. I don't think one little dot here or there is going to be a big deal, and I do it all the time, but this is your investment, so you make good choices for yourself. I'm going to use my Quick Sticks tool and some glossy accents to put down some clear sequins. These are from the Neat and Tangled Crystal Clear Mix Pack. They have a bunch of different sizes, which I really like. So I'm just going to put those down. I wanted there to be some shine, something to kind of accent that sentiment. But I didn't want it to take away from those beautiful flowers that we've worked so hard on. After I was done, I like to put a drop of glossy accents on my actual sequins to make sure they aren't going to go anywhere in the mail. And then that's the whole card. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me, having story time. I appreciate it, and I will catch you guys on the next video. Bye.